There are men in this world who carry death like a second skin. It clings to them, follows them into quiet moments, into morning coffee, into the arms of the few who dare to love them. And no matter how far they walk from that life, no matter how deeply they bury the guns and the bodies, death never forgets their address. John Wick had been out for 5 years. 5 years since Helen passed. 5 years since he'd burned his grief into the foundation of every criminal empire that had dared to touch what was his. 5 years since he'd earned his impossible freedom, paid for in blood and measured in the bodies of those who thought the Baba Yaga could be caged. He lived quietly now. A cabin upstate, far from the Continental, far from the high table's reach, far from the world that had tried to consume him whole. He kept Helen's memory alive in the silence. In the garden he tended. In the old Mustang he restored piece by piece in his garage. In the dog that slept at his feet every night, Daisy's successor, a shepherd mix he'd named simply Dog. The locals knew him as the quiet man on the hill. Polite. Reserved. The kind of neighbor who'd help you fix your fence but never stay for dinner. They didn't know about the markers buried in his past. The coins that still held weight in shadowed places. The legend that whispered through underworld channels like a ghost story told to frighten children. But legends never truly die. They only sleep. It started with a visit. On a Tuesday afternoon, as John was splitting firewood behind his cabin, Dog began to growl. Low. Dangerous. The kind of sound that meant stranger, not squirrel. John set down the axe. His hand moved instinctively toward his hip, empty now, a habit from another life, and he turned to see a figure standing at the edge of his property. A woman. Mid-40s. Dark suit. The kind of tailored perfection that screamed Continental. She held up her hands. Empty. Peaceful. Mr. Wick. I'm not here to fight. Then you shouldn't be here at all. She stepped closer. Carefully. My name is Sophia's daughter. Amara. You knew my mother. John's expression shifted. Barely. But enough. Sophia Al-Azwar. Casablanca. A marker repaid. A friendship forged in fire and dog bites. She'd helped him when no one else would. Risked everything because he'd once saved her daughter. Sophia never mentioned. She wouldn't. She kept me hidden. Safe. Away from this life. Amara's voice cracked. She's dead, John. Murdered. 3 days ago. The world seemed to stop. The wind. The birds. Even Dog went silent. How? Poison. Slow acting. Designed to look like natural causes. But I found the evidence. Toxicology reports. Surveillance. Someone wanted her to suffer. Someone with a long memory. John's jaw tightened. Who? Amara pulled out a photograph. A man John recognized immediately. Older now. Gray at the temples. But unmistakable. Sergei Volkov. An enforcer John had crossed 15 years ago during a dispute over territory. A man who'd lost his brother when John had been sent to clean up a mess the Tarasov family had made. Sergei had been too afraid to retaliate directly then. But fear has a way of fermenting into something darker given enough time. He couldn't touch you. So he touched her. Because she helped you. Because she called in her marker for you. John took the photograph. His hands were steady. But something ancient and terrible was waking behind his eyes. Where is he? John. If you do this, you break your peace. The high table will. The high table already took everything from me once. Let them try again. Amara nodded slowly. Brooklyn. He runs a security firm now. Legitimate front. But underneath, he's still connected. Still protected. John looked at Dog. Then at the cabin. At the life he'd built from the ashes of his grief. Helen's voice echoed in his memory. You don't have to be that man anymore. But Sophia had died because of him. Because she'd honored a debt. Because friendship meant something in a world where nothing else did. He turned back to Amara. Tell me everything. John Wick didn't storm in like a young man hungry for violence. He was older now. Smarter. He'd learned that revenge wasn't about rage. It was about precision. It was about making every bullet count, every movement deliberate, every death a message written in a language the underworld understood. He spent 3 days preparing, reaching out to old contacts, calling in favors that had gathered dust. The Bowery King owed him. The director owed him. Even Winston, from his forced retirement, sent word through encrypted channels, "Be careful, Jonathan. The table's eyes are everywhere." John didn't care about careful anymore. Careful was for men with something to lose. Sergei Volkov's security firm operated out of a converted warehouse in Red Hook. 20 men on rotation. Ex-military. Well-armed. Cameras on every corner. It was a fortress designed to keep out ordinary threats. John Wick was not an ordinary threat. He moved at midnight. No flash. No spectacle. Just the patient, methodical work of a man who'd been doing this since before most of Sergei's guards were born. The first 3 went down in the parking garage. Silenced pistol. Professional. They never had time to call for help. Inside, John moved like smoke through the corridors. Past motion sensors he'd already disabled. Through blind spots he'd mapped during his surveillance. This was what he did. What he'd always done. The architecture of death was his native language. He found Sergei in his office on the 3rd floor, drinking expensive whiskey, watching security feeds that showed nothing but empty hallways because John had looped the recordings. The door opened. Sergei looked up, and for the first time in 15 years, he saw the Baba Yaga standing in his doorway. The glass slipped from his hand. "John. This isn't, we had an understanding. I stayed away from you. Sophia Al-Azwar. You remember her?" Sergei's face went pale. "I don't know what you're." John crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed Sergei by the throat, slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack the drywall. "She helped me. She owed me nothing, but she helped me because she was honorable. And you poisoned her. Because you didn't have the courage to come after me directly. She was leverage. She was connected to you. John's grip tightened. She was a friend. That means something. Even in this world. Especially in this world." Sergei gasped, choking. "Kill me, and they'll come for you, the Volkov family, the table, you'll have nothing. I already have nothing. You all made sure of that years ago." John raised his gun. But before he could fire, alarms blared. Red lights flooded the hallways. Sergei smiled through the pain. "Backup trigger, silent alarm, you're trapped." John released him. Let him fall to the floor gasping. "Then I'll go through them." He stepped into the hallway. 20 armed men converging from both ends. And John Wick, in the center, with nothing but muscle memory and the cold mathematics of violence. What happened next would be whispered about in continental bars for years. How the Baba Yaga walked through bullets. How every shot he fired found its mark. How 20 men became 20 corpses in the span of 4 minutes. When the silence returned, John stood alone in a corridor painted red. He walked back to Sergei's office. Found him trying to crawl toward a panic room. John pulled him up. Looked him in the eyes. "You wanted to hurt me through the people I cared about. Here's what you didn't understand. Those people? They're the only thing that ever kept me human. Without them, I'm just the monster you all created." He pulled the trigger. The war that followed was swift and brutal. The Volkov family declared vendetta. The High Table, sensing instability, sent adjudicators to restore order. Markers were called. Debts were settled. The underworld convulsed. And through it all, John Wick moved like a force of nature. Not because he wanted to, but because he'd already lost everything that mattered. And a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous weapon in existence. The final confrontation came in the ruins of the old Continental. The building had been shuttered after Winston's exile, left to rot as a reminder of what happens when you defy the table. John stood in the lobby, surrounded. 50 enforcers, 3 adjudicators, and at the center, the Elder's representative, a woman with ice in her veins and authority in her voice. John Wick, you have violated the table's peace. Again. There is only one recourse. I'm done running. Done kneeling. You want me? Come and take me. She studied him. This weathered, broken man who'd somehow survived everything they'd thrown at him. Or, she said quietly, you disappear. Truly. Completely. No cabin upstate. No visiting old friends. No markers. No memory. You become a ghost. And in exchange, we forget this vendetta. The Volkovs are compensated. The balance is restored. And if I refuse? Then we burn everything. Everyone. Every person who ever helped you. Every place you ever found peace. We erase John Wick from history by erasing his history. John looked around the ruined Continental. At the place that had once been sanctuary. At the world that had taken Helen. Taken Sophia. Taken every moment of peace he'd ever tried to build. I accept. The adjudicator nodded. Then you have 24 hours. After that, John Wick ceases to exist. John returned to the cabin one last time. He packed nothing. Brought nothing. Just stood in the doorway with Dog at his side, looking at the life he'd tried to build. He'd killed for love. For honor. For friendship. And in the end, it had cost him the only thing he'd wanted, to be more than the weapon they'd forged him to be. He knelt down. Scratched Dog behind the ears. You're going to someone good. Someone who'll give you the life I couldn't. Amara would take Dog. She'd promised. It was the last favor he'd ever ask. John stood. Walked down the driveway. Got into his car, not the Mustang, that stayed as a gravestone for the man he'd tried to be, and drove toward the horizon. No destination. No plan. Just the road and the sunset and the ghost of Helen's voice reminding him that love, even when it destroys you, is still worth the cost. In the rearview mirror, the cabin grew smaller. Then disappeared. John Wick was gone. But somewhere, in the shadows between legends and nightmares, the Baba Yaga waited. Because some men don't get to retire. They only get to rest. And rest is just another word for waiting. In the Continental's ledger, there are debts that can never be fully paid. Actions that echo across years. And men who become myths because they refuse to stop being human. This was one chapter. One debt. One goodbye. But in this world, goodbyes are never permanent. They're just intermissions between wars.